Hello and welcome to another video of my Aspie marriage. Today I wanted to talk about finances. So in my previous video I talked about housework, and with regards to housework and finances, they're not Aspie traits per se. A trait to me is something that all Aspie individuals share, and when it comes to housework, there are some that are good at it and some that aren't. It's the same with neurotypicals. You get neurotypicals are good at housework and those who are sloth. And it's very similar with finances. You get people who are good at it and people who are bad at it, whether they're on the spectrum or not. And as I've also mentioned in previous videos, it's not so much the trait that I'm talking about in my videos, but how his Aspie-ness affects how the discussions moving forward go. We started off right off the bat having a fair bit of friction when it comes to finances, and I will point out right now that finances are one of the number one things that all couples argue over, or at least the majority. I'm not sure the percentages. I have a feeling it's 100%, but I could be wrong. It's definitely way up there with the conflict that couples face. So we are by no means any different to everybody else. So you've got situations where somebody might be gambling all their money away and you're arguing over that, or you have a shopaholic who is spending way more than they earn and juggling credit cards to pay for all their expenditure. What else? You have people who maybe quit their jobs at the drop of a hat. Meanwhile, you've got bills and mortgage to pay, but that person's just dropped out of work, and now you're having arguments over that. In our case, hubby is very good with money, and so am I. So, very similar to the housework, I thought, since I'm good with money and he's good with money, we're just going to get along. All will be well. However, of course, it didn't work that way. He was very sort of controlling, I guess, financially. It started with when I moved in with him and the bills increased, the shopping increased. All of a sudden he was used to this single man bills, and then there's two people and the bills have gone up. And he would go shopping and spend, let's say, $220 a week, which was an increase for him. It probably cost him $90 before I was there. And then I would go shopping and I would spend $150, and he would be cross. He would be asking me, how come it costs this much? Let me see the bill. What did you buy? And what's this here? And did you really need that? And And I'm like, hey, you're spending more than me. And this is where the Aspie-ness comes in. It wasn't that I could say, you're spending more than me, and he would go, oh yeah, okay, all is well, get you, got it, no problem. Instead, he would still be agitated, and then the next time I went shopping, he would be agitated again, and this is how it would roll. So you couldn't really reason with him, you couldn't logic with him, which is very ironic because Aspies are meant to be highly logical. And in this case, it wasn't so much that. So as time went on, any kind of financial issue was a stress for him. And we were by no means rolling in the gutter. We were dual income for most of the time. And I'm not a shopaholic, I'm not a spender, I'm not a gambler. I'm quite frugal with money. However, he just stressed about almost everything. I mean, to the point where I made a $1 operator call and he was getting cross about that, and I was saying to him, it's $1, don't worry. It's okay, we're not going to go bankrupt over this $1. And as time progressed, he would then start buying big ticket items, new furniture, TVs, game consoles and things like this. But if I spent money, such as that $1 operator call, he would be agitated. And so I would be having conversations with him about this, obviously, saying to him, look, it's hypocrisy, you're not being fair, you're not being reasonable, you're not being logical. You're spending X amount on big ticket items and I can't spend jack shit, pardon my French, and without you getting cross. And he kept denying it. You know, this is another thing about, I think, I would say it's a trait of Aspie's. Correct me if I'm wrong. But he would be denying it. Like, no, that's not what's happening. I'm not buying big ticket items. And then he'd say, like what? And I'd tell him, like what? And he'd say, that's ages ago, don't worry about it, yada, yada, yada. So there's a lot of sort of tension there. And it came to a head when I had a car accident and crashed my car. And so I then needed to get a new car. However, I brought a second-hand car. And after I brought that second-hand car, he was really cross. He didn't want me to get that particular sort. He wanted to control the car that I got and everything else about whatever I was doing financially. And I considered that I'm an adult, and if I want that particular car, I should be allowed to have that particular car, so long as it's within my means to get, which it was. Anyway, because he was agitated by it, he just kept having digs every couple of days, every week, and this went on for months of him, you know, talking about, oh, now we need new tyres for your car, now it needs a service, grumble, 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 grumble. And that was frustrating. At one point in time he said, I've bankrupted the family with this car. And then about 6 or 8 months later he says to me, how would you feel about me getting a new car? And he meant brand new, off the block, whatever. And I was instantly agitated because I was like, that would be hypocrisy. And I said that to him. I said, that would be hypocritical, you were yelling at me, this would bother me, yada yada. A little while later I realised something that he said made me realise that when he asked me that question back then, he was already doing it. It was already started. He'd already started to purchase this brand new car. So then he gets this brand new car, and I was probably the angriest that I've ever been in our relationship, because it was this ginormous visual reminder of the discrepancy between what he's allowed to spend and what I'm not allowed to spend. And so it then became a kind of constant reminder, and I was constantly agitated and upset and annoyed. Every time I looked at that car I felt, and I know it's kind of silly because it's just a car, but I was just, really, really, really fuming. And we'll get into that later about how I fume. I'm not a yeller. I grew distant. I just stopped sort of interacting and talking and going anywhere with him and all this sort of stuff, because I was just, I couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't reason my way out of it into this sort of calm way of feeling. I was just really, really angry about it. And that was ironically the thing that made him realise, because he was kind of looking at his new car next to my cheaper, affordable second-hand car, and he realised the difference. It was this real visual cue that I'd been telling him for years. You're allowed to spend X, Y, Z, and I'm not allowed to spend anything. And here's this visual reminder. And so there was kind of a light bulb moment for him, I guess. After that, he started being less stressed about what I spent, and I don't spend a lot, but he just started being less stressed. So he started sort of getting me new tyres, for example, and doing up my car a little bit and things like this, because he started to realise that he hadn't been fair. And so now we sort of do this thing where if he buys a big ticket item, it's my turn to get the next big ticket item, and we're sort of balancing it out that way. Now, it did take a long time. This was probably 6 years ago by now, so it did take a long time of us arguing over finances, not agreeing over finances and things like this. What I've realised with finances and housework and everything else that I will talk to you about and have previously talked to you about, a lot of what he does is based on fear. He's so worried about how people are going to perceive us. And so for him, it's terribly frightening to think of somebody coming over and the house isn't immaculate. And with the finances, He's afraid that I will just go crazy and he won't have control over what is spent and whether or not we can pay the next bill and things like this. So he's ruled by that fear. And so I just have to spend my time reassuring him that I'm not going to bankrupt the family. Everything is okay, and I just have to sort of keep placating him and calming him down and letting him understand that we're not destitute. Everything's going to be okay. So long as you're sensible and I'm sensible, all will be well. But I can understand that fear. I mean, finances are a terrible fear. Nobody wants to sort of be really poor and rolling in the gutter. It's an awful feeling. I've been there, I've done that. I've lived off 2-minute noodles and $30 a week for food. It's awful. It's really, really, really stressful. How am I going to pay my next bill? Things like this. So I do understand his concern. It just gets a little bit tricky when you're trying to navigate around that fear. And in our case, it's harder because there's nothing to be fearful about. We're not broke. I'm not a shopaholic. In fact, I hate shopping. He's won the lottery in that regard. I just, the thought of going out and buying stuff and having stuff and having all these things around me, you know, like shopaholics when they go shopping, it's a thrill for them. Ooh, I'm gonna have some stuff, some new stuff. Get to go out, come home with some new stuff. I hate that. It's just not my scene. So he really has won the lottery. So again, like the housework, we had that same dynamic where I kept having to try to convince him, I'm really not as bad as you think. You need to calm your farm. All is okay. And so as I said, it's not a trait per se. I have heard people talking about Aspies and how bad they are with money. So maybe they're spending exorbitant amounts of their special interest, more than they earn. They have anxieties and struggle to hold down work and things like this. So I have heard of people coming from the opposite spectrum where they're really not very good with finances, and in those cases quite often it's the neurotypical partner who is in control of the finances. And in our case, of course, I'm the opposite. I've got a husband who's working well, he's head down bum up, he just goes to work, he just gets it done, no problems. He doesn't even take sick days, he's just that good. And financially we're doing okay because he doesn't just quit his job and all these other things, and I'm not a shopaholic, so all is well. So as I said at the start, it's not a trait per se, it's just each individual sort of quirk. Anyway, I'd love to hear about your situation and how finances roll for you. Do you have a situation where your partner is controlling about the finances? And if so, how do you go about handling that? And I ask that specifically because that's of course my issue. If you're on the opposite end where your husbands or your partners, females can be wives as well, are really not managing the finances well, how do you deal with that? Because as I said, finances are a big thing. A lot of people in relationships argue about finances. So any tips and tricks you have out there to share with us how to make that roll better, we'd all love to hear from you. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch my video.